I longed for the nights where my mother would don an evening gown, punctuate every sentence of her lecture with the clicks and the clacks of her high heels as she strutted to the door, and leave a deep red imprint of her lips on my forehead before she allowed herself to be whisked away by her suitor of the night. Those nights are rare when your single mother works 12-hour shifts at the local nursing facility and comes back home to a long evening of drinking, loud television, and heated arguments with her children. This night was better than all the others because the universe had aligned the plans of everyone in the household to coincide, leaving me behind for at least 5 hours worth of quite alone time, something I rarely got. I was in my bedroom, my secret stash of snacks scattered all over my bed and the one shared laptop we had in the house all to myself. I didn't know what I wanted to do first: watch a movie? Sing along to karaoke songs on YouTube? Have a one-woman dance party? I settled upon watching a scary movie and turned off all the lights to set the mood. I was barely past the 30-minute mark when I heard the distant sound of snickering. For a few seconds I convinced myself that it was just a background noise in the movie I was watching, but my reassurance faltered when I paused the film and still heard it. I was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I just waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I slowly shifted my position. The bed frame creaked under my weight as I did so. I planted both my feet on the ground and paused for a few minutes. It was most probably one of my siblings who had come home early and was playing a prank on me. It could have even been one of my neighbor's kids. Whoever it was, I was a 16-year-old girl who wasn't taking any chances. I finally had the mind to scan the room for anything I could use to defend myself. I shared a room with 6- and 8-year-old girls. The entire place was child-proof, and my best bet was a heavy sports trophy, but I figured that it was better than nothing. The snickering got louder and nearer. It was turning into chuckles. I didn't know whether I wanted to wait in here until I was found or do the finding myself. I took another long, hard look at the trophy in my hands and decided to wait. With each minute that passed, the laughter increased in volume and enthusiasm. It sounded like a child who knew his parents were heading towards his hiding spot during a game of hide and seek, laughing with the voice of an adult. Then I heard the sounds of chairs being dragged across the hardwood floor. It didn't sound like it was with much purpose other than to clear them out of the way. A slippery, slobbery, wet noise followed suit. It sounded familiar, yet it wasn't one I had particularly heard before. Whoever was in my kitchen was slamming, ripping apart, and mushing whatever it was he had in his hands. I heard squishes and squelches, and I could only assume that it was some sick psychopath with a fetish for breaking into houses and mauling large animals. Whatever it was, he was laughing throughout. I was terrified. There was a stranger in my kitchen, laughing manically as he seemingly prepared himself a snack on the counter. There was an intruder in the downstairs of my house, the place where I had left my cell phone. I turned around and looked at my laptop, wondering if the police would respond to emails. I decided to give it a try anyway and tiptoed back to my bed. My trembling fingers struggled to type slowly and quietly, but I eventually managed to send an email and post for help on social media. An excruciating 7 minutes passed by until I heard someone pull up on the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps running up to the front door, frantically jamming a key into the keyhole and swinging the door open. The laughter stopped for a brief second before it turned into a roaring guffaw. A shriek and an ear-piercing scream penetrated the silence of the neighborhood, and whoever produced it turned around and ran towards the street, taking their screams with them. The manic laughter followed suit, and I finally dared to run to the bedroom window. I saw my sister running down the street while screaming, trying to attract as much attention as she could, and by the looks of it, she was succeeding. Running in the opposite direction was a naked man, covered in a massive amount of blood that I had only seen before on television. He was still roaring with laughter as he disappeared out of sight. I watched out of the window as a posse gathered just outside my house. My sister hadn't stopped screaming. I realized that she wasn't just trying to attract attention, but she was actually hysterical, and I did not want to go downstairs and greet whatever had brought my sister to such a state. The crowd grew larger as the flashing red and blue lights arrived and footsteps stormed into my house. I heard curses and retches downstairs before someone finally called out. All I could manage to produce at first was a squeak. A female officer appeared in my doorway and asked me if I was all right. She told me to follow her with my eyes closed. Great advice for a rebellious teenager. I noticed her grasp become tighter as we reached the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't help treating myself to a peek. Through squinted eyes, I saw the dismembered body parts of my mother neatly arranged beside her decapitated head on the kitchen counter. I passed out. 47 minutes. That was how long I had spent listening to my mother being torn into, ripped apart, mutilated, and eaten. The person responsible for that ran straight to his nursing facility, straight to his bedroom, and straight into bed. He laughed as they restrained him to his bed. He laughed as he was taken away in cuffs. He laughed as he was locked up in a cell. He laughed as he made eye contact with me in the courtroom as his sentence was being announced. I won't be surprised if he was still laughing when they strapped him to the chair. He will never laugh again. Nor will my mother. I was at home making dinner on a regular night after work. It was around 7 p.m., or maybe even later, and I had only gotten home about an hour before. I wasn't cooking anything fancy, just a small chicken breast and some frozen corn. I had just finished with the chicken and was draining the water from the corn when I heard a light scraping sound coming through the house. It was short and quick, not very loud, but strange enough to make me flinch a little. I continued with what I was doing, thinking it was just some weird sound the house was making that I'd never heard before. But then the same scraping sound vibrated through the walls again. It was such an unusual sound that I had no idea what to think of it. I quickly finished plating my food, then went toward the front door to listen for it again, hoping to pinpoint where it was coming from. I waited for maybe 30 seconds, not hearing anything, then went back to the table to eat. Even at this point, I wasn't thinking much of it. I was only curious as to why the house was making that sound, but I wasn't worried in the slightest. I spent a few minutes eating, then went over to the couch to rest and watch some Netflix for a bit. But throughout the show, I would constantly hear that obnoxious scraping sound over and over. Eventually, it got so aggravating that I turned off the TV and just waited, listening. When the sound came again, I was able to hear it more clearly. It was coming from somewhere upstairs. I quickly walked up to the second floor, still just annoyed at the house for ruining my night, but also a bit more concerned that there might actually be something wrong with it. At the top of the steps, I stayed in the hallway waiting again for the sound. A whole minute went by with nothing, so I began searching the rooms to make sure everything was okay. It didn't seem like anything was unusual or broken, so now I was starting to really get confused and worried. I put on some shoes and went outside, figuring I might be able to see a tree scraping against the house or possibly some other issue. I went to the side of the house where I knew there was a tree, but it wasn't windy at all, and the branches were nowhere near the side. I kind of just stood there, wondering how this was happening and why it had suddenly started tonight. I was tired, and this was the last thing I wanted to be dealing with. I walked back around to the front of the house, and on my way to the front door, a glimmer of light caught the side of my vision. I turned and looked, realizing it came from the front of the house. I walked further down the driveway by the sidewalk and looked back, and that's when I saw a small light coming from one of the windows in a dark room of my home. After a couple of seconds, I realized it was the attic window and that the light was moving, almost like someone was shining a flashlight around. I was horrified. Someone was in my attic doing who knows what and for how long. I stayed out front, calling the police as I stared at the window, watching the light move around slowly. But as I was talking on the phone, the light got dimmer before shining directly at me. They held it there for a couple of seconds, then shut it off. Even from outside, I could hear a few loud thuds. I immediately ran over to my neighbor's yard, trying to explain to the operator what was going on while looking at my house in terror. From where I was, it looked silent and calm, but that only made it scarier, knowing that something awful was likely going on inside. After a few minutes, nothing else happened, and the cops finally arrived. They searched the house first, then brought me inside to talk. They found multiple shoe prints in the attic and suspected it was likely a group of teenagers messing around with me, probably not trying to cause any harm. There were no signs of anyone living there or anything, which was a relief. They found some carvings in the wooden beams, but they weren't anything specific, just lines. The cops assured me that the kids were probably just messing with me and trying to get a reaction. As for how they got in, they thought the kids might have somehow gotten on the roof and climbed in through a window while I was at work that day. However, they exited through the attic doorway in the ceiling and got out through my back door. Even though the cops confidently said it was just a harmless group of kids, that didn't make me feel any safer. Knowing that some random group of people broke into my house and was camping out there all day and night while I was home is really unnerving. I mean, those cops didn't actually know what the group's intentions were either, so who knows what they actually planned on doing. Despite their reassurances, I felt a deep sense of unease. That night, I barely slept, constantly listening for any sounds that might indicate someone had returned. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, I went out and bought a security system, complete with cameras and motion sensors, hoping it would give me some peace of mind. Over the next few weeks, I found myself on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound. I told a few friends and family members about the incident, and while they were sympathetic, their assurances that it was just kids didn't really help. I kept replaying the events in my mind, wondering how long they had been in the attic, what they had been doing up there, and if they might come back. One evening about a month later, I was going through some old boxes in the garage when I found a dusty old lock for the attic door. I hadn't even thought about securing that door because I never used the attic for anything. I decided to install the lock right then and there, hoping it would be one more deterrent. As I was working on the door, I couldn't help but notice some odd scratches on the frame, similar to the lines the police had found in the attic. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the thought away, focusing on getting the lock installed. Once it was done, I felt a small sense of relief, but the anxiety never fully went away. Months passed without any further incidents, and slowly, I began to feel more comfortable in my home again. The security system helped, and the new lock on the attic door gave me a sense of control. But every now and then, especially on quiet nights, I would catch myself listening intently, half expecting to hear that eerie scraping sound again. In the end, the experience left a lasting impression on me. It made me more vigilant, more cautious, and more aware of the vulnerabilities in my home. I never found out who those intruders were or what they were really doing in my attic, but the not knowing was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I rent a very small house near my work. Nothing like what I'm about to describe had ever happened to me before, but after this incident, I've become much more cautious about who I consider friends. The day started like any other weekday. I went to work, came home, made dinner, and then settled on the couch to watch a movie. It was Friday, so I stayed up a bit later than usual, but eventually my eyes couldn't stay open, and I fell asleep during the movie. I was jolted awake by a sharp, sudden sound from my phone, a sound I'd never heard before. Squinting at the bright screen, I saw it was a notification for a Facebook message. I had never actually used the Messenger app before, so I was confused when I saw a message from a man simply saying hello. His name seemed familiar, but he wasn't one of my close friends. Checking his profile, I saw that we had one mutual friend, and had been Facebook friends for about 4 months, reminding me that I often accept friend requests from people with mutual friends. I replied with a polite hi, realizing how late it was and finding it odd to receive a random message at that hour. Immediately, the 3 typing dots appeared, followed by another message: "I love that movie too, we should watch it together." I gasped and dropped my phone, looking around my room in fear. The window showed nothing but darkness outside, yet I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. My phone beeped again, lighting up with another message. Paralyzed by fear, I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I can't even tell you how long I sat there frozen, as everything felt surreal and terrifying. Then the doorbell rang, making me jump and bringing tears to my eyes from the panic I was in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, trying to explain my situation while crying. The operator reassured me that help was on the way and advised me to lock myself in a room. I complied, trying to calm down, but my phone kept beeping with more messages. I finally summoned the courage to look and saw about 15 messages in all caps demanding I open the door. The last message read, "Never mind." A soft bang from the other side of the house broke the silence. Listening closely, I realized the noise was coming from the basement. I ran to my bedroom, locking myself in as louder bangs and shattering sounds echoed through the house. I could hear the intruder making his way through the basement and up the stairs. Though I had locked the basement door, I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Suddenly, 3 loud knocks came from the front door police. Open up, I rushed to the door and let in 2 police officers, who saw the terror in my eyes. I pointed to the basement door, and they immediately drew their guns and headed downstairs. After a quick struggle, they apprehended the intruder who had broken in through the basement window. It turned out the man was indeed the one from Facebook, not using a fake account as I had assumed. He offered no real explanation for breaking in other than wanting to talk to me. It was incredibly creepy and unsettling, something I thought only happened in movies. In the days following the incident, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The police assured me they would keep an eye on my neighborhood, and I installed additional locks and security cameras around my house. The sense of violation and the fear of what could have happened lingered for a long time. This experience taught me a harsh lesson about online security and personal safety. I went through my Facebook friends list and removed anyone I didn't know personally. It was sad to have to take such measures, but necessary. I also became more aware of my surroundings and more selective about the information I shared online. It's a sobering reality, but in today's world we have to be vigilant about our safety both online and offline.